Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all being here. We will now proceed with our hearing with the Office of Innovation and Technology and its budget testimony. So you may state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mark Wheeler, Interim Chief Information Officer. Good afternoon, Councilman Heenan and members of City Council. I'm happy to be here today, and I'm joined by Sandra Carter, our Chief Operating Officer, Steve Robertson, our Chief of Staff, and Chris Donato, our Chief Financial Officer. I'm pleased to provide testimony on the Office of Innovation and Technology's Fiscal Year 2019 operating budget. I'd first like to summarize a few of OIT's accomplishments in the last year. First, with public safety, we completed a $2.8 million replacement of the Vesta 911 call processing system. This is a system that the city uses to receive and log E911 emergency calls, and this replacement is going to better position us to later adopt a next generation 911 system that would use text messages for responses. We've launched a number of spatial technology initiatives in the last year. These include Mapboard, which is a reusable framework for us to easily create customized maps on phila.gov, like cleanphl.org, the Marathon Map, and atlas.phila.gov. Atlas in specifics is a brand new tool that combines a number of applications that the public and city staff would have had to use into one simple tool where you can search by an address, a tax account number, or a deed registration number and get all kinds of information that the city maintains about property records from violations, permits, and zoning. It also combines all of our years of aerial imagery, our custom pictometry imagery, our custom street view imagery, and historic images of maps going back to the 1860s. Finally, we are making a concerted effort to create an authoritative and highly accurate address point layer that would be used for that next generation 911 system and would have other benefits to the city, like helping us with our 2020 census enumeration. And it also includes a full base map that's customized for the city that has landmarks that extend far beyond Center City into the neighborhoods. We continue to administrate a multi-year agreement between Comcast and the city for our institutional or iNet network. This agreement allows for significant upgrades and savings and capacity at over 225 city facilities. That project is very well underway. As of January 2018, we have 71% of the scheduled sites completed, and almost 70% of the recreation centers that were previously operating without internet services are now online. We put significant effort into our ePay gateway services so that all types of taxes are now payable through ePay. In total, the ePay service collects roughly $481 million in revenue annually. In a benchmarking exercise, some city staff found that compared to 6 other US cities, Philly ranked second in the number of e-payment options offered to the public and collects 61% of our bills and taxes using this online revenue service. This compares to 65% for New York City and 22% for Boston. We have installed an additional 50 video surveillance cameras for the Philadelphia Police Department, and that brings our total number of surveillance cameras to 405. We have an innovation consulting program that held 19 sessions for city departments over the last year. These sessions are designed to help them with problem solving and approaching challenges such as improving processes and doing long-term strategic planning. And finally, in February 2017, Philadelphia was one of 5 cities awarded a Smart Cities Council Challenge grant. This helps those cities apply smart technologies to improve urban livability, sustainability, and workability. We used a separate grant from the Knight Foundation to launch a Smart Cities Readiness Workshop. This was to kick off development of a strategic roadmap that we're calling Smart City PHL. We had over 190 participants with very good discussions about smart, affordable housing, the future of public safety, and government efficiency. In FY19, the Office of Innovation and Technology plans to continue oversight of all major information and communication technology initiatives in the city. Our strategic priorities will focus on continuous improvement of our customer service and communications. We want to elevate our IT governance and have more transparent and supportive policies and models. We will continuously improve our IT security, and we will focus on elevating our community engagement and collaboration efforts. OIT's proposed fiscal year 2019 general fund budget totals $101,871,935. This is an increase of roughly $19.3 million over fiscal year 2018 estimated obligation levels. This net increase is primarily due to outfitting 401 North Broad with very specific public safety IT needs, including a new 911 call center and modernized next generation 911 system, as well as operating support for our capital projects. I thank you for the opportunity to speak before City Council, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you for your testimonies. Anyone else?
We're here for questions.
Okay, great. I'm going to defer and start off with Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're our how manyth director in the last 4 years? We're about 4? Are you the fourth in 4 years?
It's about 4.
So welcome, first and foremost, and I'm glad you decided to take on this daunting task. To give you some context of why I'm asking these questions, it was just reported today that our entire CDBG budget, if we're lucky and get through the Trump budget federally, was going to be $38 million. You just stated that our budget for OIT was going to be $101 million. Just to give you all of the poor folk in the city of Philadelphia kind of have to survive housing-wise on that. Yet, we're getting ready to give you $101 million. That's what you're requesting. For me, over the years, it's not your fault, but you're here now. I have not gotten the kind of detail I need to write a blank check for $101 million. I get the glossy stuff, which I heard you say, and I'm happy for it. When it comes to surveillance cameras, I am truly grateful for what you do for my community. It feeds into the Dibbick Center downtown, of which there are another maybe 3,000 cameras through PHA and SEPTA and school districts that plug into that, and you are an essential part of that. I get that expenditure. I don't get some of the detail I need for some of the other stuff. For example, how many live voice over phone lines do we have in the city of Philadelphia that we're paying for? And how much is that bill every year? How many cell phones do we have issued as the city of Philadelphia, and how much is that bill? How many laptops, iPads do we have that we issue out, and what is the monthly annual bill for those things? You have to say your, I'm sorry.
So we can provide the cost numbers, but the number of personal computers and laptops as of March 2018 total 21,420. The number of cell phones or smartphones total 5,133. The number of, I believe, the telecom switches, which there's a number of those broken down, but we have, is that 582?
So the question becomes, how many of them are actual lines or lines that are in people's office that no one is attached to? And how do we monitor those things?
We have a program that was initiated over a year ago to review all of our Verizon circuits and to identify those that are dead and not working so we can recoup that cost or not pay that cost. So I believe that the number that we're working with for the number of city lines is 21,908. And I would have to look up and get back to you on the number of lines that we found that were defunct and we've been
So
able
obviously
to avoid cost on.
The testimony from prior years, that's a good start. So I'm concerned about those iPads, those laptops, and how many are lost every year, and those kinds of stats, and how do we recoup those costs that we have? And I'm sure Councilman Dom would be interested in those kinds of statistics. Question, how much of the work that is done is Class 200 that is consulting work?
On the Class 200, that's consulting work. If you would let us, we'll get back to you on that.
And when you're getting back to us, who makes the justification of, I need an IT person on the payroll of the city of Philadelphia versus I'm going to subcontract that out to someone? How is that decision made on a project by project basis? Who makes that call?
It is project by project, and it has to do with what the business needs are, what the project requirements are, and if we have the talent on staff to execute the project. So it's a conversation between the business and OIT, and do we have the resource, and how quickly would we need to reallocate someone to do that work, depending on when they need that deadline or that project to be achieved. So it's a give and take, and we do our best, because it is a cost to do staff augmentations or to issue a service order, that we do our best with the staff that we have.
So, having done procurement in another life, there is an equilibrium point where it pays to put someone on a payroll versus to absorb the contract cost and profit margin that a private company would offer. So I might want to change that light bulb, and it breaks 100 times. At some point in time, it pays to bring someone on just to fix light bulbs. Who makes that kind of analysis by way of your department? So that if there are, how many contracts went out last year? And what was the value?
So to answer the first question, while Chris looks up the number of contracts that went out last year and the value, whether we put a staff person on a project or we look for consulting services or a staff augmentation, and you can call those the same thing, it is dependent upon the needs of the project and the business, and whether we have the resources in-house. And the group that does that evaluation is our project management office that's led by Catherine Lamb. We do put numbers together that we have conversations about with the business about what decision is best. Do we have it in the budget to go out of our internal resources and hire a consultant for that?
So every time my general point is that if I can get you engaged in a particular type of product and or service that only I can sole source for you, I may even come low the first year, and then based on that dependency, you're stuck because the infrastructure of your project is so tied to me. Someone has to make that analysis as to when it's in the benefit of the city. You're asking for a $19 million increase. And what I want to see by way of a report is overall that particular analysis that says it's better to hire some folk that can replace servers, for lack of a better description, versus going out to a company that gouges us time and time. And I can't say that they are, but someone has to say that, whether or not this, at a certain point, it is better to outsource versus to hire. And that analysis needs to come to this committee. When you talk about a department that's asking for $101 million, that ranks you in the top 3 departments I know of. I mean, close to. So one of our largest expenses as a municipality is your department.
And IT is an infrastructure like water and streets, so there is a significant expense to it, and we are replacing.
But I know what I'm getting with water and streets. When I walk down the street and see that 12-inch soil pipe going there. I absolutely know that we had flooding last year. So wrapping my mind around that budget expense, I get $10 million improvement at Fox Street, stop flooding. Simple math for a simple mind. What I'm asking you, and I threw that one up there for you, but I'm asking you a little more detail about the decision tree that you make every year with a $101 million request as to why it is better to go outsource versus to hire. And I think, the citizens kind of deserve that, because we don't know if we're getting fleeced by some companies that have figured out that we don't know what we're buying. And we trust you, but every time I turn around, there's a new you over the last 4 years. So I don't know if it's the last person's mistake and or lack of vision and analysis, but I do want to know the details. And bore me with them. I'll bring on a consultant to figure out the language you speak. But I want the detail before we pass your budget.
So we have a prioritized project list, and I think we can take some of that and provide detail as to why those choices are being made. And again, these are business operations that we're replacing, like large legacy systems, and they are costly to do. And we can provide more detail on those.
So if I had my Star Wars Hachi-Tachi computer that can do all of those calculations, I would, on the surface as an end user, wouldn't have these questions. But I know for a fact there are departments that cannot communicate with the outside real private sector because their software is so damn old, nobody even carries it anymore. We've got to correct those basic things in order for us to be considered an efficient government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilman Jones had raised some points that actually are a good segue in reference to our ability to communicate internally as a city as well as externally. My understanding from a recent Special Committee on Regulatory Reform and Review meeting is that during another administration, for the cost of about $6.5 million, we had purchased Salesforce as well as some licenses. And I'm curious how that's being used currently in the city.
Salesforce is being used in our 311 call center licensing. We have a project at the prisons that is currently being developed with the intention of having that on a Salesforce platform as well. From what I'm aware of, there is another very, very small project that was recently done or demoed for commerce, but I could get you details on that.
So it's currently being used for, you said 301 as well as the prisons and also a small pilot for the Commerce Department.
Yes, potentially there's a small pilot or it was a demonstration. The prisons project has not been completed. The only true operational use of Salesforce is at 311.
301. And based on your experience, maybe others in your department, is Salesforce a tool that can be used more efficiently or effectively for communications in the city?
I think it's dependent upon the project. I mean, Salesforce is a cloud-based platform that allows for agile development and creation of projects. So to call it whether it's better at communications than other platforms, I would have to have more specifics about what the goal or the objective is of the project.
Okay. The reason I raised that is that during this presentation was made during a special committee, we talked about how we could use Salesforce and for estimate of about $100,000 per year, how we can buy licenses both for health and L&I and also commerce to better and more effectively communicate. And one of the challenges I've seen over the years, not only as a member of this body, but also as an attorney, when you're doing just, for example, zoning issues, often things are stuck in people's inboxes from an email perspective, and that causes a delay. And so with a tool like Salesforce, we could see work being done as opposed to waiting for emails, we're going back and forth. I've raised concerns and questions about the health department where although allegedly electronic records are being used, but a lot of it's more of a PDF scan and we're emailing that back and forth. Whereas having this type of tool and making expenditure on these type of licenses, we could better communicate through departments and also better communicate with constituents outside of the city. And I think that's a way that we can be going forward to be more effective and reduce the time in reference to getting things done, especially communicating where things are in the pipeline of a project. From a real estate perspective, when you're going through zoning, going through L&I, it's a back and forth of communication, but if we had tools like Salesforce, it can be used more effectively to let people know where things are, especially from department to department and from inside the city to externally.
Again, Salesforce can meet a number of goals if the correct program on the platform is selected. It's not, Salesforce is a platform with a number of programs.
Platform. Right.
Well, then you'd have to choose the correct communications or workplace integration tool. And many of those tools are available on AWS and Azure and other platforms. So I would want to be agnostic about which platform we use and make sure we're getting the right tool for the communication that meets the requirements of the business and the public.
Okay, so you said you're going to be agnostic in reference to responding. Are there other cloud-based platforms that you've seen from a public sector perspective that can help us be more effective in communicating between city departments and with our external constituents?
All of the cloud-based platforms have the ability to have custom and configurable programs hosted on them. So AWS and Azure are competitive.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the advantages of Salesforce in terms of everything on its platform updates automatically when they push out their updates. Individual marketplace applications may have to have their own update frequency, but again, that's not something that we have to worry about in terms of managing in a on-premises environment by our own platform or engineering folks. That happens in the cloud. Again, it has to be dependent upon the type of tool that's selected on the platform that would achieve that level of communication you're looking for.
Okay, let me step back from a different perspective. Could we as a city be more effective in communicating among departments and with constituents that we move to more cloud-based type of systems?
There's a number of efficiencies with cloud-based systems and easier integrative opportunities. So whether that actually improves the communication or not, or just improves our efficiency at managing those systems is the question that comes to me at first. And I would say on the operational side, it can be more efficient. There is typically a cost associated. Again, whether it's a better communication tool, I'd have to know what the tool is to have an affirmative response on that. It's all dependent on the tool, not the platform.
Okay, so from your perspective, why was a cloud-based system used for 311?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I wasn't here at the time for that selection process.
Is there anyone from OYT here that was part of that initiative?
It was 311 and one of the previous CIOs. So the people who were managing 311 at the time and the CIO had come to that decision.
Okay. All right, I'm not going to ask any additional questions. I kind of see where I'm going at this point. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. I have a few questions. One, I think, naturally, I know we were together prior to coming into this meeting, as most departments do, and I appreciate your time and your first budget, right? So it's got to be a little difficult. So I really do appreciate that in the sense of that. So in lieu of national news, I think with the situation down in Atlanta, all right, how can you or could you just kind of state to the public here and to this body, the measures that we were taking as an OIT and technology and our security tech that we have in place that really will try to prevent some of that happening here in the city of Philadelphia, or at least brought to your attention as a result of it?
We did follow the situation in Atlanta and Baltimore closely. Even before that situation happened, we had begun talking about our strategic priorities internally to the department, and making sure we were doing the very, very best we could do with security is one of those. So we've initiated a security audit just for our own understanding and use, again, because continuous improvement is something that we can do on security as well as our customer service. We have a multi-layered approach to security. I don't want to get into specific details to give any bad actors any more information than they could probably get.
Confidential.
So, but I'm happy to do more in-depth briefings with council members if they would like.
Yeah, I mean, look, all I want to, ask from you and for you to state is that we as a city are taking the cybersecurity at its highest level, and it's a priority, even though some of our systems, our legacy systems are old, they are being protected, and that, we should have faith in, and which I do from our conversations in OIT moving forward.
We're taking it very seriously. It is a top priority. It's something that we discuss almost daily, especially with the issues in Atlanta and Baltimore. Okay, great.
Last two questions that I have, and I'll move it on. So what are the city's plans for addressing the ongoing digital divide in Philadelphia? And that is beyond the implementation of the Comcast franchise side letter agreements. If you could talk about potential key spots, that we have in our parks and recreation. So I know we're pretty close to having our iNetwork built out and having internet access at all our public facilities. How is that that's all the back end. Now on the front end, for those who have, since, we're lacking some information, how are we going to supplement that and increasing, or are we going to increase our key spot opportunities in our neighborhoods?
I'm going to have Deputy CIO Andrew Buss respond to that question. He's been dealing with the key spots for a number of years and he's our representative for the Digital Literacy Alliance, which is part of the Comcast side program.
He sure is. That's my second question, and then I'll lead into innovation, which I think is important that we continue here in the city of Philadelphia, not just systems, but innovation, and how that segments into our Councilman Dom's question about the private sector and recruitment into our department. So how many key spots do we have? And in addition to lack of information for other programs, which I think other members will talk about, what is the city prepared to do to increase our key spots to bridge the digital divide?
Sure. So I would say OIT doesn't actually run the key spots anymore, so it's coordinated by the Office of Adult Education.
And can you state your name for the record?
Andrew Buss, Deputy CIO for Innovation. So we don't actually coordinate the key spots anymore. That comes out of the Office of Adult Education. Our work primarily resides within the Digital Literacy Alliance now when it comes to digital literacy. So you had asked about how we see expanding this work. I mean, I really think there's great opportunity to be innovative within the Digital Literacy Alliance. So the idea of making small grants to small organizations to do creative things in the space.
Okay, which leads me to what is the status of the digital divide in Philadelphia? Do we have statistics on the digital divide? Because that's going to segue into what does OIT need to do to help eradicate it in the terms of programmatic work, dealing with the DLA, which is the Digital Literacy Alliance.
Sure. So I would say there are really no good numbers on that right now. We always refer back to a Pew study from around 2014, I think, which showed that about 19 or 20% of Philadelphians did not have access to the internet. I think, for our part, a lot of the issues now lie in some ways beyond just access, but actually getting high levels of adoption of technology in the internet. So I think programs that Mark was mentioning, such as the iNet, that's kind of an interesting way to start thinking about how you get internet access and use in communities.
And I would hope that would be a good start, right, where we recognize that it's available. And what we do with that is I think incumbent upon us, I think 19% seems pretty low, all right, to me. And, I just think that, or my question would be, what do you think the return on the investment of continue to focus in on the Digital Literacy Alliance and key spots? I want to bring back key spots because I think it's important because, we do have access at all our public spaces now. What kind of, I think, return on that investment would be, just for recruitment of our own city and employment of people who are either unemployed or underemployed?
Sure. So when I talk about ROI in terms of digital literacy, I think it's difficult to quantify, but I think if you consider how many aspects of life you now have to do digitally, it's pretty evident because you're talking about the ability to go online and find employment, look for jobs, create a resume so that you have a good resume to submit. And then also, as you mentioned, just finding out what's out there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity sort of in the workforce development area, probably on the health front as well, healthcare, personal health care.
And I do think it's not I think it's a necessity, right? Not a want anymore. It's definitely a necessity for people to be online some way, where we can offer Philadelphians as many as possible to get online, right? Because that is the future, and that's essentially what you're doing. So it's not a privilege, all right? It's a necessity, and I hope we can continue on the model of moving forward in that direction.
I think we would be happy to work with any of the research institutions in the city to look at numbers, look at ways to sample and figure out what the exact impacts are, whether that's a quantitative set of measures or qualitative measures that we can, then weave into a narrative about how well the DLA is performing in people's lives or getting them to education opportunities or job opportunities or helping them navigate healthcare. We'd be more than happy to do it. We have very strong analytical capabilities in our shop, and we can pair those up with any one of the researchers who could design the survey or do the field work and help us understand that.
Great. I'll follow up on the second round. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to start out basically with some, real basic things, but my staff said, please ask these questions because we understand that other offices had these problems too. That some things in the phone services seem to be going backwards. For example, caller ID doesn't show up anymore. When our office calls out, some crazy number shows up, as far as who's calling. And on the same note, the internet seems, if anything, to be much slower than it was. Now, and from what I understand from what people and the folks in the office deal with this much more than I do, but have you received those other kind of complaints? Is this a problem around the system? Is it being worked on? Please.
Sandra Carter, Chief Operating Officer.
Yeah.
I'll deal with the caller ID first.
Okay.
Yes, we are aware of the caller ID function. It changed when we went to voice over IP. And instead of the name and number showing up, it shows any one number of trunks. That project is being worked on as we speak. The testing actually was completed today. Council should have caller ID in the next 30 to 60 days.
30 to 60 days.
You will be the first department to migrate.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. And also the, before our lines all used to run across, now after two lines it goes right into voicemail. Is that something you...
I did see an email pertaining to that. A lot of that has to do with programming and how your phone is programmed. When we originally migrated the telephones, it was based on the programming at the time. And so any changes that are needed, we can certainly do it through your telecom coordinator. Whatever changes you would like, inform that person and we'll change it in the switch.
All right, I think that's been done, but okay, we'll try it again. How about the internet? Has there been problems with the internet that you know of?
The internet. There are
Yes.
not really problems with the internet. There is an open internet and there's CityNet. We are reviewing the overall service of both services, if you will, both networks, and we are installing additional equipment to provide additional capacity. I have received information at times that the internet is slow, and it's something that we are aware of and we
Right.
constantly monitor.
Okay, all right, thank you
You're
on
welcome.
those. On bigger issue, I guess. Through the leadership of Councilman Heenan as chair of the Public Property Committee, we went through a pretty painstaking process with the Comcast agreement a few years ago. I don't know how much you're familiar with it yourself because you weren't here. Has Comcast given any, or do you get any kind of regular reports from Comcast as far as the programs and the things that they promise inside agreements that Councilman Heenan alluded to? Is there any, I guess, any communication with Comcast on those kind of things?
Well, yes, we have regular communications with Comcast, and we
Okay.
do ask them for the numbers on enrollment with the side letter programs or
Okay.
any budgets expended. For the most part, Comcast has said that they cannot share those enrollment numbers with the city. They advise that they're unable to disclose those figures based on the general Internet Essentials numbers for the region because they find that those more specific, geographically specific numbers to be confidential and proprietary, and if released could have some competitive harm. So, you know, we respect that determination, but it hasn't stopped us from asking in different
Okay.
ways to get the numbers. Could we anonymize them? Could we roll them up to a block? Could we aggregate them in ways? Could we get, you know, the funding amounts and we could do our own back of the envelope calculations
Yeah.
perhaps? So we have been pressing them on that, and we continue to be told about the proprietary issue.
Okay. I mean, with all due respect to them, I'm not saying they're not telling the truth, but if you know, if we don't know, you know, they made certain agreements, and if we kind of don't know it, it's like, trust me, and I mean, it's nice, but you know, we'd like to know. And I hear what you're saying. You can only get what they'll tell you, but it doesn't quite sound right. They say they're going to do stuff, and then you don't. It's like, well, we can't tell you.
They provide regional numbers, so on
Yeah.
an annual basis, we get a what they call the Freedom Region, and they do give us numbers, but they don't break it down by Philadelphia, and then they certify in their correspondence with us that they have implemented all of the side agreements, and we know that they've made payments to the digital
Right,
literacy
right.
alignments. They've made the payments to the United Way for the 90-day buyout program and the low-income program.
Okay.
You know, we know that the programs are in place based on those higher level numbers.
Okay. All right. Thanks on that. And on that same note, I'm not sure when the Verizon contract is due again, but is anybody looking at that yet, or maybe comparing to what we did with Comcast, you know, that kind of thing?
That agreement is for 15 years and will expire in 2024.
Okay.
And we will start engaging on the renewal process in 2021.
Okay.
And we'd
early,
be
I
happy
know,
to coordinate with council and
Great.
community advocates on doing another needs assessment in the community and understanding how we should prepare for that agreement discussion.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. I have several questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to make sure I understood your budget, but basically your biggest increase is in $19,371,000, and you say in the information it's primarily due to the city's 911 Center for Police and Fire located at 400 North Broad. Is that 95% of that figure, 100% of that figure? How much of that is for North Broad?
It's close to 90%, 85 to 90.
Okay. And do you know if that was included in the estimates that we received for the acquisition, lease, whatever you want to call it, of North Broad Street?
No, I don't believe that it was at the time. So we had to, we were doing those estimates after the fact.
So that deal was structured that we purchasing or supposedly purchasing. We negotiated the price to $40 million for the building, and there was another $220 million of improvements. Are you saying this $19 million is not in that $220 million?
Actually, I would have to check on that with public property to see if it was fully included. I know that we spent some time recently coming up with that number, but Deputy CIO for Public Safety, Mitch Yannick, is here to help address that question.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, City Council members. My name is Mitch Yannick, Deputy CIO for Public Safety. I apologize. In reference to your question, the knowledge that I have, when the Inquiry Building was decided upon as the location for the new 911 center, I believe there was no inclusion of the cost for 911. I believe that the city administration, prior administration, may have been under the understanding that PEMA, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Association, was going to fund the entire bill. What people need to understand is there are ongoing costs to support current 911 systems. So it's my understanding that the cost for 911 was never entertained when those cost figures were
I see.
arrived at.
This is for the building where we didn't get an appraisal either, I believe.
I'm not sure how that worked out, but yes. It's for the
Yeah,
Inquiry
okay.
Building.
So here's my question. Is this the total cost of the system, or is this a down payment? And there's going to be more costs over the next 2 years? Because I think the build-out's a 2 or 3 year process.
My estimate for just the 911 portion, and the 911 portion also includes police operations has to be moved from 8th and Race, all the IT. They have to uproot those systems and move them into the Inquiry Building. The budget projections that I have right now runs about $48 million.
48 million
That's correct,
for the IT movement.
including 911 and the IT team movement. And we're looking at networks there, we're looking at running fiber there, looking at new phone systems there, we're looking at a CAD system there. So they are the projections I have. We work closely with public property. We have a good partnership with them. In fact, we meet every 2 weeks. I'll be going to a meeting tomorrow on this. So I do have some sound figures, but unfortunately, they fluctuate depending on what anomalies come up at the last minute.
Right. Well, that always can change a little, but
Yep.
I guess my only concern is that when presented with this proposal, we were told the numbers as a council body. I would like to know if that 48 million was in the total package or not. And that's not your part, but I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, maybe find out from the administration as to what is, I really would like to know the total cost, including IT, everything, for the new police headquarters building, if we can.
For the 400 North Broadway.
Yes, because I had never heard this 48 million before. This is a new number for me. And I was a little involved, not a lot, but it's a brand new number. Let me go on for a moment. I have a different view of technology. I think technology serves a great purpose in this respect. One, it gives us the systems to operate when it's working well, creates more efficiencies, and should help us save money. But I will say that for the short amount of time I've been here, 2 years and 3 months and maybe 10 days, I haven't seen us save money on the tech implementation. I always hear departments saying we're installing tech, but I never see their budgets go down. So I'm just putting that, because if you could help with that, that would be a big help.
So I think part of the value proposition is that we are replacing very old legacy operations. And something like Famous or Eclipse, or we're replacing a series of software applications or paper-based tools or manually intensive tools like the mass appraisal or the integrated building management systems. The latter one being implemented with public property last year, and CAMA being underway right now at OPA. You know, in either case, what we're allowing for is staff to move from these very onerous processes of gathering information, synthesizing information, repetitively having to go to get that information either in digital formats that they have to coalesce, make sense out of paper formats that they have to do the same thing with. These newer systems obviate many of those needs and allow people to move from those lower value tasks to higher value operations. So they can actually spend more time, and I think the previous conversations with Ellen and I point that out, that use of LiDAR data that allows them to target those buildings that they don't know are unsafe makes much better use of their resources and personnel than people trying to figure that out on their own and you know, I don't know, climbing ladders or something or getting bird's eye views on their own. it really moves us as a city. When you talk about efficiencies, they're hard to pin down on paper in terms of knowing exactly is there a cost value, but I think that the true value is that these higher level operations can be engaged by staff, even if it's not a higher level business intelligence, better planning, better execution of a project. At least they can literally be spending more time with their customers because the information is so much quicker and readily available. I have another example of that is when we had an older system that allowed us to do the lookups by addresses, and it was failing every single day. And we had 2 full-time engineers who couldn't do anything else but basically put out the fires from those failures and babysit those operations. When we created our own new custom system, the address information system, by the way, which is in the cloud, operates for pennies a day, costs nothing in terms of professional services, we did it all on our own. We don't have to babysit that anymore. And those 2 engineers, one of them moved on to do full-time application development, and that's why we have Atlas and Matboard. And the other person is now our cloud architect, helping us do a much better job with procuring services in the cloud and managing those. So they stayed on board. We didn't have to relinquish that staff. They're just doing much more essential work that we hadn't been able to get to.
So the technology is making it more productive, more efficient, basically.
Yes, and a very long-winded explanation, more effective, yes.
Okay. So just from the Pennsylvania Economy League, about a year ago, came out with a report that I'm going to share with you. You may know about it. In the last 10 years, 1 out of 4 jobs in the city of Philadelphia were tech or tech-related, 25% in the last 10 years. The economic job multiplier of tech, the highest of any job is 5 to 1. For every job in tech, we create 5 more. Example, a job at the port is 1.6. So it's in our interest to create more jobs in tech. The average income of tech is $39,000 higher. We have a booming tech business in Philadelphia. I was at South by Southwest. We have tons of tech companies here and young people working in tech. And the best one is that 1 out of 3 jobs in tech don't require a college degree. And so we have high school graduates who can go into coding and get jobs in tech. So I think this body are a big supporter of tech, huge supporter. It's the future in many ways for the city. When you think about the 30 largest companies 30 years ago, being General Electric, IBM, Exxon Mobil, and today they're Google, Amazon, Apple, etc., the whole world has changed, and it's really tech related. So you're a big piece of our government. And I look at this, and I want to echo Councilman Jones's comments. The efficiencies in tech we need to implement, making sure the phones and all the other stuff is accurate and that we don't have any dead items that we can make more efficient. But I also want to be cautious of one important thing in government. Keep going. First of all, your budget I didn't find to be problematic in my opinion. 20% is labor. Your increase in labor is 1% from last year. It's the lowest level of labor increases of any department. Your biggest increases is for the North Broad Street. That's where all the money's going. So I don't have a problem with your budget. But I just want to call to everyone's attention, because I have not done that this year yet, is that our city overhead, we talk about going outside versus going inside. We have a city overhead, and it was shared with me last year during the L&I bill for $5 million. And it's 88% are our fringe benefit cost. And by the way, the private sector is 31%. The city overhead is 34%. What does that mean? The desk, the phone, the computers, all those things we supply. So you have to look in context of employment. When we hire someone who has a $50,000 salary, the hit to us is really, with all the benefits included, $111,000. And when you hire somebody for $100,000, it's $222,000. And when you see salaries that are $150,000 in the city, it really costs the city over $300,000. So in some ways, the answer isn't always to add more people. And you have to think of it in that context when you're putting things out to bids. I just want to make sure you're aware of those kinds of numbers, because they are staggering for government. Private sector is 31, 32, we're 88%. Staggering. Let me ask a few questions on my office actually prepared. I went off tangent there.
Well, if you want to share those by email, those stats that you just read off, we'd appreciate that.
Happy to do that. The five biggest technology expenses the city's undertaken, do we have any idea of the savings of any of those projects, or were they just basically for more efficiency, as you mentioned earlier?
Do you, the biggest ones, do you have anyone in specific that you want to reference?
No, if you can give it back to the chairman or a committee and just let us know. I'd like to know, and you probably weren't in charge at that time, but of the five biggest technology investments, what's been the result? Have there been any savings, or what's been the efficiency implemented? Let's look at our investment and see what our return was.
Councilman, you mean the five top capital projects?
Yes. Thank you. Going forward, in the next 2-3 years, what do you think the biggest technology projects that we should be looking at that will give us the best efficiencies in government and the best return?
We're still dealing with some very old legacy applications within our financial system, so replacements of or modernizations of Famous and AdPix and ASIS are a top priority. We're going to start planning for those and hope to have contracts awarded and work starting in 2020. So we're going to take serious time for planning on those, as well as the taxpayer information system. Voting machines is going to be a priority. We're going to be here to help the City Commissioner's Office as a technical resource on selection, working within the framework of the Pennsylvania State Department of State and their guidelines, making sure that we are getting secure machines with audit trails. We also have work to do on e-discovery and replacement of our preliminary arraignment system. So those are top priorities coming up for us that are already in the capital program.
And Famous is the accounting system, correct?
Well, it's in the entire financial system.
And that system, I know, is pretty old. Any idea how old that system is?
Probably 25.
25 years? Yeah. So that's probably due for an upgrade.
Yes.
Are there any areas, if we gave you the keys to the kingdom, are there any areas that you think we need to increase our spending on by creating more efficiencies in this government?
I don't know if it's increased spending, but increased attention and concerted efforts. OIT is working with the Department of Finance and the Office of Property Data on correcting the many difficulties we have around sharing addressing and making sure addressing is consistent. There's probably an incredible inefficiency and losses there in terms of time and money, and I don't have any studies to back that up. But when I say loss in time, I'm thinking about the general public who has such difficulty finding their own records because the address they have isn't matching up in a city system. Or there's a discrepancy between what the OPA address is and what L&I is recorded perhaps in an older system or the deed record. I think spending time on that and being as up to date and making sure that system works, those inherent interrelationships between addresses work every single time, I think is a priority, and we're working on that. Hopefully we will have a new property identification number that works among those systems, but there's still cleanup going back into them that has to be done. And that's just laborious, and it just requires commitments by the departments.
And are you working on the CAMA system with OPA?
We're part of the steering committee, we're part of the selection, but I'm not directly involved on a day-to-day level.
Are you somewhat familiar with the CAMA system?
No, I would have to refer any details. John Hodge is here from the Department of Finance if you have any specific questions.
This is my question. I'm really trying to figure it out. What is going to be the direct benefit of having the CAMA system, and can we receive any financial savings from having that system, or is it just having appraisers having information more readily available, which would increase efficiency and should cut overhead?
Good afternoon, City Council. John Hodge, Deputy Director of Finance. To answer your question, I believe that it is to echo the sentiment of Mark. Efficiencies are certainly the largest tangible benefit. We have the ability to increase to increase the way that we interact with other agencies to be more timely. I think all of those types of things are where you're going to see benefits. You also will see the staff at OPA being able to concentrate on less data discrepancy type work and more work that is applicable to the business. Of
I understand that, but efficiencies equate to saving time, which equate to saving money and saving labor. And that's my point. I don't see the labor being saved, okay? So I'm just throwing it out there. I'd like to either think about that and come back to me, not today, but I don't see the labor being saved. I hear all about the efficiencies, and look, I know a little about real estate appraising. I know it's going to help having that system, but they should also be able to do their jobs better, quicker, more efficient, and cut down on labor.
I would say that all of those things are correct. One other point to be made is that the staff at OPA does an incredible job for the amount of parcels that each individual currently employed have to manage, if you will. So there is an opportunity to bring us more in line with national standards from organizations that they utilize that kind of information.
Well, let me ask you this question. We have 579,000 properties in the city, roughly.
Yes.
And we looked at 537,000, to my memory, that are having some sort of analysis by OPA, with only, I think, 2% not being changed, and I think a small percentage going down, but the majority going up, okay? That means OPA did a phenomenal job this past year. They looked at 537,000 properties without a camera system.
Right.
Now you're going to put a camera system in place. You're telling me there can't be any savings? Because with the current staff, they looked at 537,000 properties. What is the staff going to do if they have a camera system? Isn't there some savings of time?
There's absolutely some savings of time.
I'm just saying it doesn't make sense. We looked at 537,000 properties this year.
Right.
We're putting in a computerized system, and I'm being told we're not going to save? It doesn't make sense. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Point
Thank you.
taken.
Next question I wanted to ask. Are we okay, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead. We're going to take a short
I'm okay. We're good. No, don't worry about it.
1 minute break. Councilman, you may proceed.
Thank you. I know you mentioned earlier in the testimony that I think in payment plans, we were number 2, if I recall, in the processing of electronic payments.
Well, in ePay, when we looked at the other cities, including, let me get to that. We interviewed New York, Boston, Buffalo, Chicago, Phoenix, and Baltimore. We were, out of all of them, we were second in the number of ePay products that we offered, and we were second in the amount of revenue that we collected. And we were almost at New York, who was at that 66%, or I'm sorry, they were at a 65% level. We're at 61% in total.
And that's great, by the way.
Yeah,
That's great.
it was a really heartening benchmarking study.
And are you involved, I mentioned this 2 years ago, in computerizing our water and sewer bills and real estate tax bills?
We are part of the project with the Department of Revenue to add a second vendor to the ePay platform so we can do e-billing, so you can have completely automated e-billing account, and we'll start with the water first. And OIT does support all of the paper printing and
Does that mean
support
we'll be
process.
able to bill monthly through the internet on the water and sewer?
I believe yes, it would be an online account that you can set
Optional
up.
for those who want to do it.
If you want to sign up for it, it wouldn't be mandatory.
And I bring it up because I think my office figured out that if 50 to 60% of the people signed up, the amount of water and sewer bills we send out, we wouldn't have postage, we wouldn't have the envelopes, we wouldn't have the labor of the mail. The savings could be $4 million or $5 million a year, and we're looking at a 5-year budget, that's $25 million, just computerizing, and 50 or 60% of the people taking advantage of it. So there's an example that I'd like you to think about, I'm using that, of technology saving money, okay? So more examples like that is what I'm really looking for, because we can implement that technology pretty easily and save us $25 million over 5 years.
And those are easy examples because we would be reducing postage and we would be reducing the envelopes and the services. The mailroom would still continue to operate, but with less of an influx from those operations.
Do you think we're going to get to a point 5 years from now where on handheld devices, people can enter either an ID or their name or social security number or whatever, and we'll be able to tell them every tax they may owe us in the city, what properties they own, all the data will be tied into that handheld device, which would be impressive on our part to get to.
I think we're definitely moving towards that goal. One of the ideas that we've had at OIT is to be able to leverage all of the data that we have spatially and understand what happens on each and every block every day. So we would be able to tell you how many times a city vehicle has been on that street and what types of services were performed and when it was plowed and when the garbage was collected, or is it on its way, and letting people know that kind of information. So the billing would also be separate from that, but similarly the same. There's a great piece of technology that we could use here called Pay Near Me, which would allow individuals to have an account on their phone, on their smartphone, have a tool on their smartphone so they could literally pay bills at 7-Elevens and convenience stores. So they don't have to go to our customer service centers, and they don't have to have this online account. If that's something that they don't want to do, they could at least have a lower level entry to that and pay their bills anywhere.
I think that's all good stuff. Of the cities in our country, which cities do you think are the most advanced in technology in government today?
It depends on, I think, on the metrics that you're looking at. There's good work being done on a number of areas, both in Chicago and Seattle. Some of the mid-sized cities can do a lot, because they're smaller, they can put things into effect much more quickly, buy newer systems and implement them. It really does vary. I think when we do our smart cities work, we glean a lot from, places like St. Louis, who is working on things, Washington, D.C., even New York, but we take bits and pieces because not one city isn't doing 100% of great things across the board. It's
Right.
it's in certain disciplines and areas, so we kind of pick and choose what we're learning from them.
And do you have a 5-year plan for the department as to where we hope the city will be 2023, technology-wise?
We are working on a new IT strategic plan that's both inward and outward facing. We plan to have that wrapped up by mid-year and published. So that will give us a pretty good framework. I think 5 years is very hard to determine. With my teams, I've just done 2-year strategic plans. So in my role, we've been talking about doing the same things by units and then making sure that that's consistent with both our 5-year plan that we work on and then the IT strategic plan.
Are you having any problems attracting talent to work for the city right now in the Office of OIT, basically?
I have my experiences with my teams in recruiting, and I've talked to others around the department. We just had a conversation with some folks from Commerce about this, and we do struggle, I think, with high expectations around salaries because the private sector will pay more. We also struggle that when we look for senior level positions, or I should say very experienced positions that have to have kind of a strategic capability as well as a technical execution, that we tend to find people who are a little bit later in their lives. They have established homes and families. They have a spouse who has a career, and they need to make that, when they make their proposal as to what salary that they want, they're thinking about the cost of the spouse having to do a further commute, moving their kids into another school district, and so they want that to pay off. And I know in my personal experience, that's been some of the linchpins where they would like to stay where they are, but work for the city. But we do have the requirement that they live here. and we support that. So I think it's a tension between salary and expertise, experience levels, and trying to attract those people, and them not wanting to give up what they have where they are. And I've heard the spousal suggestion come up many, many times, that it's not worth my spouse having to give up their job or them now having to have an hour commute because we would move inside the city from New Jersey or greater Pennsylvania.
Let me give you the last comment, not really a question, but you know Sylvester Mobley, Coded by Kids. You're familiar with Sylvester?
No, I'm not, actually.
We have to get you involved with him.
Okay.
He's teaching kids how to code. And I'm behind a program that I started. I challenged the tech community to get to 20 high schools that will teach 15 kids in every high school coding for 3 years, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. And right now we're up to 18 schools, and it's all private funding. I'm doing 4 schools. We have 15 kids in the 10th grade learning coding. They're going to be learning it in the 11th and 12th grade. And my point is that that might be an avenue where the city could interview, hire people from these classes, connect with Sylvester. We can hire our own people right from school, and they get great jobs. I think it's a great opportunity. We're up to 18 schools. We're shooting for 20 schools. So I think when we're looking to hire people, it'd be a great opportunity to do that. In fact, Will Smith is doing West Philadelphia High School. I've gone to do West Philadelphia High School. The cost is about $14,000 per school for 3 years. When you think about the investment of changing a child's life, it's $1,000 per child roughly over 3 years. It's peanuts. And yet we get them into the technology world. So whatever this office can do to even have them as interns or get them exposed and get them involved would be helpful.
Yeah, we'd be happy to give that contact information and look at it. Definitely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman, I appreciate that 28-minute and 3-second questioning of our OIT department, but I think much needed, all right? And then much needed, but I think it's always good to, when you have the expertise. The councilman, we were talking about recruitment. I even mentioned recruitment earlier with L&I, so here we are now with OIT, and I just want to ask a specific question on the recruitment. In addition to salary, all right, because you have folks that are coming out of school who believe more in innovation and civic-minded and how they can give back and how they can make government more efficient and make government work. How are we attracting those types of employees from the private sector or at a school, all right? And you have that balance of, on the supervisory level, or somebody with real experience that may not have innovation blended into their systems persons, right? And their responsibility is to make sure that they're a team manager, all right, and we got to get this legacy system up and running, fixed, transferred over seamlessly without messing up anybody's payroll or any other kind of mistakes. So how is your challenge now, where a few years ago we were all about innovation and then it went to systems, maybe leaning to innovation, because I think that does help with recruitment. So I'm a firm believer of having innovation being the enrichment, program, and even with the systems and the mindset of OIT. So how does that, in which you encounter now for your recruitment, how does that come into play?
Well, let me start by saying that I think, innovation was never lost. I don't think we shifted gears in any way, because the ability to take new ideas and to listen to staff and to have an atmosphere where teams feel that they have a safe environment to bring up ideas and to advocate for their ideas, I think is something that we developed during the Abid administration, and we didn't lose it. It was always there among the teams, and we have new leadership here now. Sandra Carter had stepped up into operations. We have a new security chief of security, and he and I were both through a program on leadership. Sandra was in the same program on leadership. It had a very strong innovation component. And what that tells me is as I see people work around the departments, ideas happen, ideas are listened to, ideas are implemented. You can define innovation in many, many different ways, and it is not just an external operation where we're engaging with one specific constituency.
It's hard to measure.
Right, so it's everywhere. And I learned that decades ago. I was in a program where we were trying to encourage sustainability by businesses and universities. And what I learned is that the best ideas to be sustainable weren't coming from the top. They were coming from the people on factory floors and the people doing the cleaning of the buildings, because they wanted to save time and they were really invested in their jobs. And coming up with a new idea that may have been innovative just kind of comes natural to people. You just have to have the management teams ready to take advantage of it and put it into place. So I think we have that, and it's ripe for it, and we have our innovation management team who can continue to just make sure that we're focusing in on it. And if we have a unit that isn't working as well as others, then we should put them through that training and evaluation.
And I know Councilman Thomas has been hands-on when it comes to the tech community and the private sector, and trying to use some of their in-kind services and attraction, say, look, we need your help, we need your expertise, and it works. And so I'm curious, is it continuing to work? Have we still made that an offering in the tech community, and has it resulted in an attraction of talent?
With my limited experience with the GIS teams and our development teams, there are a number of applicants who find us whenever we have a position open, and they put in their letters or they're telling us in the interview process that I've heard about you, I've read about you in magazines, I've been paying attention to what people are talking about in some of the meetup groups, whether it's the civic tech meetup group or a community meetup group, where they're talking about how great some of the civic technology in the city is, and what the city itself is trying to do to promote that and be a part of it. So I don't think we're at a loss for those people finding us at all. I think we can do a better job in engaging those groups and making sure that the door is open for conversations. And I'm happy to do more of that.
Well, that's great. Back to a few questions that I've had. All right, so last year in the budget, you noted that we developed a personnel accountability system for the fire department. Can you describe how this operates, and will it fully come online before the move to 401 North Broad, or is it up and running now?
No, I think that project is in the programmed phase. We haven't, and I don't want to misspeak, so I will get back to you with the details on that, but I think it's still in the planning phase.
Oh, it's still in the planning phase.
It hasn't kicked
off
yet.
So it'll be for the transition when the entire OEM system goes over to 401 North Broad.
I will have to get back to you. I don't know if it's like
2020.
Councilman Michiani again, Public Safety. Personal accountability system
Can you move your...
Oh, I apologize. The personal accountability system is under the capital budget project. The money is reserved for that. We're waiting to work with the fire department to set the priorities. The inquiry building is a little bit different than personal accountability system, but that money is reserved. We actually have a team from the fire department working with OIT in the planning phase, and they're assessing different products out there now that may help the fire department moving forward. As far as a timeline, when that'll be finalized, yeah, it's too early to say because they're just kicking the project off. Fire department had to wait till they had enough personnel. We actually have a project manager assigned to it from OIT.
Is there a coordinated project manager working with the OEM and public property as we make the transition over to 401?
Yes, for 401, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Councilman Thomas had mentioned 9/11, the 911 system. Sorry. So the 911 system, a few years ago, it was, the contract had ended, and was it extended, or did we do the equipment, or did we just extend the service on the managed part of the...
So 911 has a lot of...
Because we're going to need a whole entire new system.
911 has a lot of moving parts. It has the computer-aided dispatch is one part that fire and police have, that has the phone mechanism, which Mark spoke about earlier, is one of our accomplishments this year. It also has radio technology. The problem with the 911 system is because the city was waiting for a decision as to what location they were going to put a new 911 center. There was no money being invested, and the infrastructure was failing. It was breaking apart, so we had to address all the infrastructure to make sure 911 is working. As we're moving into the Inquiry building,
When you move into a new, in the Inquiry building, we will have a new 911
Yes.
system that's up to date, managed services.
that is
right? I
correct.
think Verizon manages that, or do you have multiple?
Yes. Verizon right now, we are close to a contract with them managing the call processing equipment, the 911 phone system. Verizon will continue to support us there. We have Motorola for the radio side that's continuing to support us.
Do you use Philly Wireless for any of those emergency communications that are,
Not at this time. The calls that come in the 911 center are usually landline, but 76% of them come in through wireless providers.
but the Wireless Philadelphia that has been abandoned in our neighborhoods all throughout our city, maybe it's operable, maybe it's not operable, maybe we use it for an emergency uses only. What is the status of our Wireless Philadelphia equipment on our public property?
The current state of Wireless Philadelphia, all of the equipment has been removed. The leases remain in place, but the equipment is no longer located in any neighborhood or on any infrastructure.
Oh, so all the equipments were removed?
Yes, sir.
So we don't even need them for emergency, for police or fire, for any other kind of security? We don't use them at all?
We do
anymore?
not. The equipment was removed, and then
Is the service contract for any of them, I mean, has that been abandoned as well, or are we still paying for managed services for?
the only thing that is being paid for are the leases associated with the network. There are no other costs associated with it. Everything has been canceled.
So who is managing that network? I mean, who are we paying for that network?
Associated with the leases that you mean?
That's correct. Or you can, if you don't know it, you can provide it to the chair.
We can get back to you. I think the clarification is that we're paying leases for the physical towers. They're not a service. So we leased space on towers and had the cell equipment positioned there that was then operated by the
Okay. So
airplane.
on buildings? Or,
Well, no,
or
I believe
towers.
so the only things that are in our inventory are leases for tower locations
okay.
that we continue to pay
Well,
on.
they're valuable space.
Yes. And then in terms of public safety, they're all on the 800 megahertz network, and we have dedicated towers for those that we have a contractor maintain and keep in
And we have a
shape.
plan for them?
Yes. No, we're going to maintain them for the public safety services, the 800 megahertz towers. We are having a study done to see if other cellular equipment could possibly be put on there, but we want the study to confirm it before we would make any decisions.
Right. So you mentioned Comcast and the franchise agreement and the lack of, well, the statement was, we have side letters, there are programs, it's your understanding that they're being used, but proprietary information is not being provided. With the lack of information and not knowing where we are with the digital divide, wouldn't it make sense to, how do we know to strategically increase more people online ourselves without having that information provided to us?
Those are valuable data
Right,
points,
I
and we
mean,
should have them. Yes.
And again, I go back to, key spots are important. We have to take things in our own hands, all right, if somebody else isn't going to provide us with information. All right, what if somebody wants to get their GED and, they don't have, if they're not online, or if, the kids in our schools and, have to come home and they have to go in their program. You mentioned moving towards all right, so we have Office of Property Data, Office Warehouse, that collects a lot of data. We're moving towards more mobile apps, and we could pay bills online, or we could pay things online. I mean, it's almost like a PayPal. All right, I mean, we do it to reserve parking spaces. I think the parking authority, is already more advanced than, in some of that cases. And I hope we move towards all that, all right, but we can't look over the fundamentals that people need to be online, and people, just can't be set aside because we want to refocus in different areas, just because some of our providers aren't, giving us, any kind of information. Councilman, or somebody had mentioned, Councilman Gridley mentioned the Verizon franchise agreement. It's going to be up in 2024 or something like that. I mean, you're going to be negotiating a 911 a deal with them, right, for managing our 911 calls when we move over, if they're the provider, if they're still the provider. That's a good opportunity to really get them to engage in like neighborhood commitments and providing services for Philadelphians that aren't online. So, all I ask is that you take advantage of opportunities that present itself in front of you as they come up, because I think, moving to a $48 million, system, well, not moving towards, a system that may cost $48 million, and then there may be management service fees on top of that, that they should really be a good partner in the city of Philadelphia, prior to their franchise agreement opens up. And last, where is Verizon on their fit out, on their VIOs across the city of Philadelphia?
So Verizon has about 302,000 residential households to complete their build-out under the obligation in the franchise. They have approximately 126,000 residential households that remain subject to an exception recognized in the franchise agreement, meaning that Verizon couldn't get access to the building or was denied access to the building. We are working with them on that remediation, on getting those last 3,225 accounts identified and 3,225. I apologize. Yeah, it's there's 3,225 residential households left to complete. So, and again, those are largely due to accessibility issues that Verizon has noted. And do we have a remediation plan, or we need to? And we're working with Verizon to make sure that those do get completed by the end of May.
Okay. All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I totally agree with Councilman Heenan about these pathways for people in Philadelphia to get jobs, whether it's OIT or L&I. So I just want to put that out there. But also, the new accounting system. Last week, I learned that we have not reconciled the payroll account of the city of Philadelphia since 2010, or the disbursement account. And I also noticed in the CAFR report, dated June 30th of 2017, that there's a $33.3 million discrepancy of what's on our records versus what's in the bank. And so in the new accounting system, will there be a way for supervisors along the way and department heads to be notified through emails of whether or not accounts are reconciled timely, maybe 30, 45 days after the month closes, and warning signs come up when it's not, more than 3 months? Some of these are 7 years. I mean, that's really not good accounting on our part. And so I can't go back, but I want to make sure we put in place a system that warns us going forward, and we have all these safeguards in place. And that may be not just for reconciliations, that might be for other things, and it may be going to people in our departments of government so they're aware that something's not being done properly, and it calls attention to them. And if we're putting in a new system, now's the time to think about that.
I would agree. Those sound like great ideas. I think that requirements like that will come up in discussions with the business.
Okay.
And I don't know where that's, like 2020. Right. Yeah, so we haven't started any of the initiation around those plans yet. I think for the accounting system and Famous, we're just starting to look at what the internal project management team and sponsor in the Department of Finance would look like.
The more safeguards that we can put in place, the better it will be for the city.
Gotcha.
And we thank you very much for today, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there further questions, comments from anyone? So many people are left. All right, there being none, this committee will stand in recess until Wednesday, April 11th, 2018, 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene here in room 400. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilman.